Hello everybody, this is your Digital Super Saiyan 3 back here with another video, and welcome to the month of May. And finally we're getting into my May pay-per-view, and boy, it's a stinker. And yet again, I returned to WCW 2000, and this is my review of WCW's Slamboree 2000. Yeah, I know. I knew I was going to review a Slamboree since I dedicated this entire year to WCW. And yes, I'm doing 3 pay-per-views from WCW 2000 in this year. So, yes, I know. I'm not going to tell you when the other 2 pay-per-views for 2000 are going to be. You'll just have to wait and see. But anyway, yes. Back in 2020, I did a review of the Great American Bash. That was probably the worst WCW pay-per-view ever. Probably the worst pay-per-view I ever watched from one of the big 3, which was WWE, WCW, and ECW. Well, since now WCW and ECW are gone, and now WWE or WW/WWF is still around. Well, now it's just WWE. And yes, a new big 3 ended up emerging with the likes of TNA and AEW. But anyway, I digress. Let's get into it. Slamboree 2000. So, this is also the second pay-per-view of the Bischoff and Russo regime, as their new blood are the top heels in the company. And they are continuing their war with the Millionaires Club. And yes, going into this pay-per-view, the Millionaires Club had just built momentum, swinging in their favor. Now we're getting into this show. On commentary, you got the likes of Tony Schiavone, Mark Madden, and Scott Hudson. Now, this show is known for the triple-decker cage, or the Ready to Rumble cage, which we will get into when we get into it. So, on to the show. We begin with the Millionaires Club arriving in this big-ass tour bus. Yes, that's right. They have a tour bus. Yes, all of them are there. You see Hogan, Nash, Flair, Luger. Every one of the members of the Millionaires Club are arriving on a tour bus. And then you have the new blood in their locker room, just watching on the monitor, just mocking them, being so overconfident, for their matches later on against the members of the Millionaires Club who are in action against the members of the New Blood. Anyway, on to our first match, and it is for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship, as you got Chris Candido, the defending Cruiserweight Champion, with Tammy Cinch. Yes, aka Sunny, but the WWF owns the Sunny trademark, so she's only using her real name as Tammy Cinch. As Chris Candido defends against the artist formerly known as Prince Iaukea with Miss Paisley in Prince Iaukea corner. And Paisley, oh boy, she's getting into it with Tammy all throughout this match, and the match ends when Tammy goes to try to hit Paisley with a steel chair on the ramp of the ring that's connected to the ring apron, because the entranceway is connected to the ring on this show. And she ends up hitting the artist with a steel chair, and the artist kicks out, because referee thought he had counted 3, but but apparently the artist kicked out, and then Candido ended up dropping a vertical suplex, and then nails him with the diving headbutt. 1, 2, 3, Candido is still your Cruiserweight Champion. And man, what a decline the WCW Cruiserweight division went through. Especially how bad it was in 2000. Hardly any good Cruiserweight title matches. The Cruiserweight title by this point meant nothing after that fat piece of shit Ed Ferrara won it. After what it was won by that fat piece of shit Ed Ferrara. Okay, next up we're getting into our next match, and it's supposed to be a 2-on-1 handicap match, as you got Terry Funk defending his Hardcore Championship against Screamin' Norman Smiley and a mystery partner. Okay, so you see Terry Funk go looking through the backstage area, looking for Norman Smiley. Looking for Norman. He said, "Have you seen Norman? Have you seen Norman?" And Doug Dillinger and the WCW security say no. He probably went that way, and then finally Terry Funk goes into the men's room. He tries to go into a men's stall, and then he gets blasted with a fire extinguisher by Norman Smiley, and it starts the hardcore title match between Norman and Terry as they're brawling through the hallways. They're battling by the interview set. We're seeing lots and lots of trash cans and lots of weaponry. And yes, you hear Mark Madden address the whole, he's granddaddy hardcore because of how old Terry Funk is during this time period. Terry Funk, yes, middle-aged and crazy, and yet, he's wrestling in 2000. Terry Funk was one of those guys who held on way too long, and, that's just says a lot for a guy like Terry Funk. And you're seeing him and Norman Smiley are battling it out, and the mystery partner, who's really big and fat, he's getting some really lousy trash can shots. He can't even do any good trash can shots. And yes, the mystery partner, once the fight reaches the ring, we soon learn that the mystery partner was fucking Ralphus. Fucking Ralphus. WCW kept this big fat fuck Ralphus, but couldn't be bothered, to keep some of the stars that had left their company, guys who could have been the future of the company, and they pissed it down the toilet. They shit it down the toilet, whatever you want to call it. They had five guys, yes, I'm also counting Chris Jericho, that could have been the future of their company, and they just threw them away like trash. Anyway, and yes, they ended up keeping that fat bastard Ralphus. Ralphus was a waste of space. He wasn't a wrestler. Ralphus shouldn't have ever gotten in the goddamn ring. But, he did. Anyway, yeah, and it's really gross when he tries to do Norman Smiley's big wiggle. Just, ugh. Okay. Terry Funk ends up winning the match regardless, and of course Terry Funk was going to win, and he ends up walking out still with the Hardcore Championship, and Terry Funk is still the Hardcore Champion. Now we're going to get into an interview as the world champion David Arquette had just arrived in his own limousine, and Mean Gene Okerlund's like, "David Arquette, I thought you would have arrived with the Millionaires Club." And David Arquette, he's giving his interview, he's talking about, yes, Diamond Dallas Page knows I'm not a wrestler. Diamond Dallas Page knows I'm not a sports entertainer, but, I am scared, Gene. I am scared to death. I am scared about what awaits me in that triple-decker cage. Now we're getting into our next match here. And it is Shawn Stasiak. Yeah, the perfect one. Shawn Stasiak defeats Curt Hennig. That's right. Meat defeated Mr. Perfect. You had Shawn Stasiak, who was christened as Meat back in the WWF. He was a major jobber in the WWF. And he beats one of the best Intercontinental Champions in Curt Hennig, a.k.a. Mr. Perfect, with his own freaking move. So you're telling me Shawn Stasiak can beat Curt Hennig, who was one of the greatest Intercontinental Champions, of the past decade, what of the past two decades, basically of all time, one of the greatest Intercontinental Champions, and a former AWA champion in Curt Hennig. And Curt Hennig loses to Shawn Stasiak. Oh yeah, and Shawn Stasiak comes out with this really lousy rendition of the Mr. Perfect theme. But we are not done. We're not done yet. Because next up, we will be getting into our next match. Oh. You want to go in? As it is for the WCW United States Championship. And alright, we're in the locker room of the New Blood, and you see Vince Russo taunting Miss Elizabeth, saying, "Hey Liz, I got a special surprise for your boy toy later on." And then Vince Russo goes over to Scott Steiner, who's just busy warming up, getting ready for his U.S. title match, and Scott Steiner's like, "Don't touch me," he's getting all pumped up and everything, and yeah, you shouldn't touch a guy like Scott Steiner, especially when he's, getting warmed up and stuff, and also not forgetting that Steiner was on the juice during that time period. Sure, Scott got himself clean, and I can give him commendation for that. And I can commend Scott Steiner for cutting off the juice, and, no longer is he on the stuff. But at the same time, I'm still not a fan of him regardless. And we get into our next match. It's the United States title match. As you see, Scott Steiner coming out with Medeja and Shakira, these two women who are his freaks, as Freakzilla is coming out as he is the U.S. champion, as he won the U.S. title in a tournament at Spring Stampede. Yes, there was a U.S. title tournament, and Scott Steiner ended up winning it back at Spring Stampede, where he defeated Sting in the finals of that tournament. And don't worry, we'll get into Sting later. Don't worry, we'll see Sting later. So, Scott Steiner ends up taking on Hugh Morris, but as Hugh Morris is coming out, he says, "Cut the music. I do not want to be called Hugh Morris anymore, because that was a name Eric Bischoff gave me to look stupid. I am General Hugh G. Rection, as that is my real name." Yes, he's calling himself General Hugh G. Rection here. And now the U.S. title match is on, and I gotta say, Why did this match even need to happen? Look, Hugh Morris, one thing I can give Hugh Morris credit for, yes, I am impressed that a big guy like him can fly around, but at the same time, why? What? This was a weird time period to be a wrestling fan, especially if you were still watching WCW. And I gotta ask, why were people still watching WCW during 2000? Why did people still tuned in? You know, why were there loyalists during this time period? Why did people continue to try to support WCW despite the fact that they were obviously by this point losing the war and continuing to get thrashed by the WWF? Because no matter what WCW did during 2000, it wasn't going to change anything against the way the World Wrestling Federation was spanking them. Anyway, the match ends with Steiner, working on the neck. He locks in the Steiner recliner after doing so much damage to Hugh Morris, or General Hugh G. Rection, and you see the Misfits in action, aka the Fired, Chavo Guerrero, Lash LaRue, and Van Hammer try to jump the guardrail, but they're being taken away by R&B security, which is Bischoff and Russo security. R&B security. Russo and Bischoff security, as yes, Bischoff and Russo have their own security force. And then, to make matters even worse, just when you think things have gotten worse for Hugh Morris, out comes Booker T to save Hugh Morris's ass. Yes, Booker T comes out to save General Hugh G. Rection from Scott Steiner and the Steiner recliner. Steiner lets go of the recliner, and he and Booker T are brawling towards the back, and that's just about it. Yeah, pretty garbage match this was. Now we're getting into another garbage match, as yes, the WCW 2000 train does continue to get really bad. As you got the total package, Lex Luger defeating Buff Bagwell. And you have, before the match goes on, Vince Russo tells Elizabeth to go change her dress because the white dress Elizabeth was wearing to Vince Russo looked like a tablecloth. He's telling Elizabeth, go get changed. Your dress makes you look like you're wearing a tablecloth. Go wear something nice. And now the match itself. Yeah, it's pretty standard and pretty stupid. I mean, yes, Elizabeth does come out, and after nailing Vince Russo with a baseball bat in the knee, she escapes the New Blood's dressing room. Yeah, there were no members of the New Blood that were in the dressing room to chase down Elizabeth and prevent her from leaving. After she nails Russo in the knee with the baseball bat, she comes down to ringside, and Buff Bagwell grabs the baseball bat and nails Luger with the ribs, and then right as Luger was going to do the Buff Buster, Elizabeth hits Buff Bagwell with the baseball bat. Then he in the back, and then gets hit with the torture rack. Luger nails the torture rack on Bagwell, and Luger wins, and he gets Elizabeth back, right? Well, then Luger is ambushed by Chuck Palumbo wearing the same goddamn tights. Yes, Chuck Palumbo, who had been wrestling on WCW Saturday Night from the WCW Power Plant, and he's coming out wearing the same goddamn tights as Lex Luger, and man, the tights looked ridiculous. It's like a son trying to try on his dad's clothes. and it looks awfully stupid that he's trying to steal the same exact tights and knee pads that Luger is wearing, and he nails Luger with this shake weight, and then he and Bagwell beat down Luger, and then he puts Luger in his own torture rack, and then Bagwell, the defeated Bagwell, takes Elizabeth back to the New Blood's locker room where Vince Russo is. And we're not even done with this show yet. Now we're actually getting into something good, actually. We're getting into our next match, which is Chris Kanyon. That's right, Chris Kanyon and Mike Awesome. Now, we're getting into our first good match of the show. But it doesn't end with a decisive finish. Oh, no, because we can't have a decisive finish on this show. Well, we did have a lot of decisive finishes, but especially for the good match, for this being the best match so far, Kanyon and Awesome went to a no contest. It ended in a no contest because Kevin Nash came out and he starts attacking Mike Awesome. After all, Mike Awesome did attack Kevin Nash first on the night that Mike Awesome debuted on Nitro. Yes, still as the ECW champion, by the way. And then, of course, the New Blood comes out. Members of the New Blood come out, and they end up attacking Nash. And then Flair, Sting, and then Flair and Sting of the Millionaires Club come out, and they fight off the entirety of the New Blood. They fight off members of the New Blood, which, okay, yeah, that were part of this attack. And, of course, Kanyon and Awesome didn't even have a finish to their match. And yes, before the match, Kanyon, delivered this promo talking about how I'm not like a guy like Mike Awesome who needed to kiss someone's ass. I am with Diamond Dallas Page. Diamond Dallas Page taught me one thing, and that is, you don't make a name for yourself by kissing ass. You make a name for yourself by breaking your own. By busting your own ass. And, yes. Too bad Kanyon would end up retracting that when he would join the New Blood at the Great American Bash. Oh, don't worry. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. Okay. Next match. It's the grudge match. It's a match that's been years in the making, as Shane Douglas defeats the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Shane Douglas defeats Ric Flair in Kansas City, a city where Ric Flair made a name for himself. Where Ric Flair won his first ever NWA World title. You have Shane Douglas for years who had spent the bulk of his career, mocking Flair, shooting on Ric Flair, that Ric Flair wouldn't give him the time of day, and finally, he gets his wish. He finally gets Ric Flair one-on-one in the ring, and Ric Flair, who had been silently not wasting his time with a scrub like Shane Douglas. I love how at the beginning of this match, Ric Flair calls Douglas, he grabs a microphone and says, and it calls him a ECW dipshit. Yes, he called Douglas an ECW dipshit. Then, Flair and Douglas get into their match, and Flair, he's not wearing any trunks, boots, or any robes. No, he's wrestling purely in street clothes. Yes, he's wrestling in his street clothes. He's wearing a black t-shirt, black jeans, and, he's wrestling in street clothes. Shane Douglas, he uses a chain from his boots. This is also the second time I've watched a WCW pay-per-view and Shane Douglas takes out a chain from his boot and then puts it in his trunks. Just like how he did it when I reviewed Sin with Sin 2001 back in January. So then, Flair, right as he is about to have Douglas beat, out comes what everyone thought was Vince Russo, dressed up as Sting, wearing a Sting mask, crack a baseball bat over Ric Flair, and then technically it was not Russo. It wasn't Russo. Shane Douglas ended up winning the match and gets his W over Ric Flair. But then Ric Flair is saying, "Russo, you owe me 5 minutes." And then Lex Luger brings the guy with the Sting mask back in the ring, and it turns out, no, it wasn't Russo. It was not Russo, because the real Russo ends up cracking his bat over the back of Lex Luger. He wipes out Lex Luger, and the guy in the Sting mask and Vince Russo ended up beating down Flair, and Vince Russo's like, "Start the clock." So Russo and the guy in the Sting mask are beating down Flair, and then the music of Kevin Nash hits. Nash gets some offense, and then right as Nash was about to jackknife powerbomb Russo to hell, a low blow is nailed on none other than on Nash by Daphne. Yes, that's right. Daphne low blowed Kevin Nash, and then Ric Flair ended up getting cracked in the skull, cracked in the head with a miniature Statue of Liberty, and the guy with the Sting mask was revealed to be his own son, David. Yes, that's right. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Fuck David Flair. Fuck David Flair, this entitled brat. David Flair, one of the worst second-generation wrestlers ever. Second-generation wrestler, whatever. David Flair didn't belong. He certainly didn't want to be a wrestler. He didn't want to be there, but, he ended up debuting in early 99. Didn't have as much training. Was handed the U.S. Championship back in 99. Betrayed his father for the NWO. To the NWO. And then, a year later, he does it again, this time showing that he's a part of the New Blood. Oh, and yes, this does lead into the home invasion angle on Nitro, where Russo, along with David Flair, Crowbar, and Daphne, invade the home of Ric Flair. Invade Ric Flair's home, and David goes under a tour, being the tour guide of the entire house. I'll talk about that. Yeah, that's enough. I'm going to talk about that subject matter. And yeah, they spend the whole segment berating Reed Flair, the late Reed Flair. And my condolences again to the Flair family for the loss of Reed Flair. Anywho, back on topic here. we're getting into our next New Blood versus Millionaires Club match, as we have Sting defeating Vampiro. And I gotta say, this match was absolute garbage. Yes, Vampiro comes out to the ring with a pipe, with this big-ass pipe that's as big as my head. It's a very big pipe he's carrying. Of course, because Russo and Bischoff wanted to have referees relax their authority, because we don't want to end in a count-out or disqualification, Vampiro was actually allowed to use the pipe. But also, so was Sting. And Sting came out. Then Sting came out. And yes, this stems from ever since Vampiro had turned his back on Sting. They had a first blood match on Nitro, which really wasn't really much of a first blood match because Vampiro just dumped the blood on Sting. Instead of making Sting bleed himself, he just dumped random blood on Sting and then hung him from his own harness. Anyway, yeah, like I said, this match was bad. Sting got the victory. Nothing more to be said here. I mean, yeah, their match at the Great American Bash was a lot worse than this one. None of Sting and Vampiro's matches during this time period were any good. And now we're getting into our next match, as it's going to be Hulk Hogan taking on Billy Kidman with Eric Bischoff as the special guest referee against Kidman. Now, Kidman is being interviewed by Mike Tenay. Mike Tenay is like, Billy Kidman, you're moments away from facing the immortal Hulk Hogan. And then Billy Kidman says, let me just cut you off right there, Tenay. Immortal? I've beaten this jackass 3 times, okay? In the past weeks or so. And now, I'm planning to make it 4 times. So yeah, you're calling this jackass immortal, so stop kissing his ass, Tenay. And you know, that was just Tenay just showing respect for how Hogan is as a legend, since after all, Hogan had been wrestling since the late 70s. I mean, he started his career in the late 70s. And now we're getting into this match. You see Eric Bischoff, the special guest referee, come out, and he's got Kimberly. Of course he's got Kimberly. Everyone's distracted with Kimberly. Then Billy Kidman comes out with Tori Wilson, and Tori Wilson's wearing this really, 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 really pretty glittery dress. This pink dress. Okay, anything Tori Wilson wears is a plus for me, since Tori Wilson is very, very pretty. She's still very, very pretty even to this day. Tori Wilson still looks great for her age. Tori Wilson still looks good. I'm not gonna lie, Tori Wilson still looks so good for her age. And then you see Hulk Hogan come out with his nephew, Horace Hogan, and both Horace and Hulk are both wearing these black sleeveless bowling shirts, and on the back of the shirts, they have the letters FUNB, which means F the New Blood. Which means F New Blood. Fuck the New Blood. And yeah, it's a really provocative shirt. Like I said, F the New Blood. Anyway, we're getting into our next match here. And it sucked. Of course this match was gonna suck. I mean, Bischoff said, oh, I'm gonna be impartial. I'm gonna call this thing right down the middle. Call it right down the middle, my ass. Bischoff was incredibly one-sided. And every time Hulk tried to go for a pinfall, Bischoff's like, no, I'm not going to count for you. We see tables be used. Kidman does bust open Hogan. Hogan does get busted open, and Horace Hogan did get sent back to the back. But regardless of that, Bischoff and Kidman got laid out through tables, and Hulk Hogan used Eric Bischoff's hand to count the 1, 2, 3 for himself, and Hulk Hogan had just defeated Billy Kidman. Hulk Hogan just defeated Billy Kidman. Neat. Nice. Alright, now we're coming into it. The main event. The Ready to Rumble Steel Cage. Diamond Dallas Page, David Arquette, and Jeff Jarrett. 3 tiers come down. It's a very massive cage. Okay, despite what people think of the Ready to Rumble movie, I gotta admit, the concept of the triple-decker cage was really nice, I guess. The cage itself looked really good, actually. And I gotta say, it's probably the most ambitious match WCW tried during that year. I mean, most of it was just Page and Jarrett just beating the shit out of each other. David Arquette took a few bumps, but not as much as Page and Jarrett, as Jarrett and Page both bled. Page was the first to enter Hardcore Hell, which was the second tier of the cage, after climbing through the hatch in the first cage, which was in the middle of the ring. The first cage was so huge, though. They're in the middle of cage number 2, and they go through the wall. Both Jarrett and Page go through the wall of the cage. They go through Hardcore Hell's wall. They didn't... And then they gotta go up... They gotta climb up cage 2 to get to cage 3, which is the guitar room. And then climb up from the guitar room, where all those guitars are located. They gotta climb up to that small, tiny-ass cage to where the WCW title is being held. Of course, Mike Awesome comes out and he attacks Page. You know, Mike Awesome climbs up the cage and he attacks Page. And then Page gives Mike Awesome the Diamond Cutter. And then, of course, Jeff Jarrett and David Arquette are on top of cage number 3. Even though Page, before the match started, told Arquette, don't go for the belt. Maybe go for the guitar to defend yourself, but don't go for the belt. But you thought Arquette, being Diamond Dallas Page's friend, would honor their agreement. But no, Arquette doesn't. Arquette turns on Diamond Dallas Page and hits him with a guitar, and then Jarrett nails Diamond Dallas Page with the last guitar, because there were only 4 of them in the guitar room. From the guitar room, Jarrett and Page destroyed the first 2. Arquette destroyed the third one over Page's back, and then Page gets hit in the head again by Jarrett. And then Jeff Jarrett, claiming his second WCW World Championship, is now the WCW Champion again. But it's not done yet, as then Kanyon is brawling on top of the cage with Mike Awesome, and Mike Awesome tosses Kanyon off the cage onto the ramp below, trying to basically mimic the Undertaker and Mankind Spanish announce table spot from King of the Ring 98. Yes, they were trying to do that. And this all took place in the same arena where Owen Hart had fallen to his death the previous May of 99. I kid you not. And that was Slamboree 2000. Final thoughts. Okay, despite the turn of Arquette at the end of the triple-decker cage, the triple-decker cage match was still sort of fun to watch. And, of course, Kanyon and Awesome had an okay match, even despite it ended with the no contest with the massive brawl between the Millionaires Club and the New Blood. So, yeah. Anyway, join me next time as my year of WCW pay-per-views continue when I cover the 1996 Great American Bash to cleanse my palate of this atrocity. Anyway, see ya!